Hey, what's up guys? JB here. Welcome to another edition of my Future Look series. And today we have a new water unit in Chunak. And this guy was released roughly 2 weeks ago on the Japanese side. Unfortunately, there really isn't a lot of hype about this guy, and I've not really even seen many videos even discussing or showcasing this unit. So I don't really think he's been all that popular thus far on the Japanese side. Nonetheless, he is the first new addition to the water element since Astrius. So let's preview his kit today and let's see what he's all about. Now Chunak is going to be a 90 cost permanent pool unit. He has a main job of Fencer. He can wear hats and cloth, and he has a base move 3 and jump of 2. Starting off with his TMR here, and this one offers 2 casts of a 40% attack and 20% luck buff to the party. I think in most cases, if I'm looking for a luck effect, I'd probably be looking at Locke's TMR for the total evade that it brings with that combination of luck and agility. Or if I'm looking for just pure raw luck, I would go with somebody like Luel's TMR. So assuming you have access to those TMRs, maybe this one is more of a niche play if you're looking for this specific combination of effects, boosting not only your luck and your attack. Moving into Chunak's stats here, and starting off, he has just a really nice attack stat here. He has an innate total of 582, and that does have him sitting just inside the top 10 for total innate attack in the game. Staying with the good here, he is well above average for both dex and luck stats as well, both in terms of the innate starting totals and his base totals. And basically that just means he's going to scale very well when it comes to buffing either of these stats, either through vision cards or by other means. Adding on to that nice dex total that he has got a very strong starting crit value here as well with 27. On the damage resist side, it is a little bit bare bones, but notably he does get 15% to pierce damage. And I think this is going to be nice for him to have, especially with Flagbearer Glaciella recently being released as well on the Japanese side. He also gets a 10% resistance to missile as well as a 10% area resistance picked up from his mastery ability. On the more negative side, there's no innate defense or spirit here for Chunak. He's also -5 to magic damage and also neutral to slash damage as well. And honestly, with all of the slash and magic damage, those are two of the more prominent damage types we see. It's not the greatest of spots to be in. I think those attributes, coupled with his lower end HP total here, will have him in a potential one-shot territory for high-powered slash and magic damage dealers. On the agility front, his base agility sits at only 54. For context, this is actually on the lower end of the spectrum. It's only one more than Thancred has, actually. I'm not super concerned about it in Chunak's case, though, because he does actually get 12 added agility on his board, and he does have an agility passive that we'll talk about here in a moment. Alright, so moving into Chunak's passives, and he does actually have quite a few useful ones. The first one here from his Fencer job, I believe, is an always on for him, since this is actually going to be his main source of defense penetration, and that comes along with a 12 evade on top of it. Now, Chunak is actually a unit who is going to crit very reliably, as we just talked about in the stats overview. He has both that high raw dex and natural crit percentage. So for an all-around build, I think I would actually pair this first one here with option 3, just to enhance his skill potencies just a little bit with that 20 crit damage up that he's going to get there. Now for more of an all-out evade build, you could pair passive 1 with passive number 4 here, and that's going to give him a 12% agility boost, and that's actually going to up his mobility there as well. For autoplay, that may be something that you may or may not want, depending on the map, but this is very strong for manual play, as always. His raw innate evade in this build would be at roughly 68%, and this is actually a similar level to units like Laswell or Tifa or Ziza. And that's definitely workable, it's not terrible, but certainly a step or two down from the top evade units in the game. Now in terms of an accuracy build, you could pair passive 1 with passive 2, which is his Nightblade passive, and that's going to give him a boost of 25 accuracy. And that would put him at a total of 197% innate accuracy, which is very, very good and just inside actually the top 10 for innate accuracy. In terms of that evade or accuracy build though, remember his base luck is actually in a pretty strong spot, and he does scale very well to luck boosts, and that's going to certainly help his case for either of those builds, even more so once he's fully geared and equipped. Now Chunak's counters are definitely not a huge strength for him. I think the best one that he gets is probably the one from his Fencer main job, and that's the Mirage Feint ability that I have here. It has a decent 3 range on it, and it's actually a preemptive counter, and it drops the accuracy of the attacker by 25 for 3 turns. It does only apply on physical-based attacks though. So another potential option, you know, maybe if you're going up against more magical focused units, would be his quick action passive from Thief. And that's going to give him a short-term boost to his agility if that procs off. All right, so moving into Chunak's main job, and we'll start with his buffs. His first buff is an EX enhanced version of the defensive footwork skill from Fencer, and that gives a 25 evade buff along with 20 single target resistance to himself. Now the EX enhancement for this will actually add 30 defense and 30 spirit, and that part of the buff actually lasts in perpetuity, you know, until it is dispelled. And in order for that to be dispelled, he actually has to sustain 2 hits in battle. Keep in mind though that any multi-hit attack will wipe this off in one go. Still, this is a pretty solid addition to the skill nonetheless. You know, one of the weaknesses that we did talk about in the stats overview was his lack of innate defense and spirit. Alright, so his second buff here is the Ready to Engage skill from Fencer, and this one gives a 15 area resistance to the party. On top of that, it's going to give him a 10 AP restore every time that he crits. So 2 pretty nice buffs that he's getting here in his kit, and these will definitely go a long way in sort of helping pull him out of that one-shot range. The AP restore on crit that he gets on this is definitely going to go a long way as well, and sort of keeping up his sustain through the fight. Alright, so let's look at his attacks next, and starting with his low-cost skill here, and this one is actually really basic. You know, there's no real utility on this one, and it has a range of 4 and a range height of 1, the low 121% mod on it, and this one is just adding an increased chance to crit on top of it of 35%. And you know, I think he's going to be critting on pretty much every target anyway, even without that additional crit, but it's there, and it's nice, you know, if you're going up against targets that have particularly high luck or have built up their crit evasion. Alright, so his next attack here is a burst style AoE with a range of 2 and a range height of 1 emanating from the caster. It has a 170% mod, again with a 35% increased chance to crit. Now this one does have a debuff tied into it, and it's going to decrease the target's crit range by 40. This skill is kind of whatever for me. You know, the debuff itself maybe could have some niche value against certain targets, but it's not hugely powerful in my opinion, and it's certainly not going to decrease the damage by all that much. But it is actually the highest mod here in his main kit, you know, as you'll see at 170%. Alright, so his third attack here is definitely a true highlight for him. This one is a range 3 with a range height of 1, does a 165% mod, and this one before the damage is going to break protect, it's going to break barriers, and it's going to decrease the target's defense by 30. Boom, so this one is just going to kill almost all of your target's defenses in one go. It's also a 2-hit attack on top of that. It is limited a bit in its range at just range 3 here, but otherwise this skill is quite nice and will make it very difficult to mitigate Chunak's damage, and in essence the team's damage as well by stripping away all of those defenses. Alright, so next up his Job 25 ability, and this one is a range 3 with an additional range 1 on the cross AoE, getting it up to a range of 4, and it has up to a range height of 2 on the area of effect as well. This one again is a 165% mod. So as we can see here, no large modifiers in the main kit here for Chunak. And this skill, prior to the damage coming in, is going to buff Chunak's slash res penetration by 30%, and it lasts for 3 turns. You know, as we've seen in his kit so far, he doesn't have any other source of slash res penetration, so this will be a very nice buff for him to get. This one is also a 3-hit attack on top of that, so definitely a pretty nice skill here, and it gets decent enough range at range 4 on the AoE. It's certainly going to help him against some tankier targets out there that maybe have built up their slash resistance, and also a very nice skill from a water chaining perspective as well. Alright, lastly, and along those same lines, his Limit Burst, and this one is a range 3 with a range height of 1, and prior to the damage landing, this is putting a massive debuff on the target. It's going to drop their single target resistance by 38%, and again, this one is a 3-hit chain attack as well. So very similar effect here to Yerma's Limit Burst actually, and this one is definitely going to be a big damage, sort of big impact skill in my opinion, both in PvP and PvE. You know, obviously getting this debuff down on a tank or a boss is going to amp up not only Chunak's damage, but also the team's damage as well. And really nice that this debuff actually fits in very nicely with the other existing water PvE chainers as well. Units like Farm and Tidus and Astrius. Alright, so let's look quickly at Chunak's sub-jobs next, and I can definitely see some use for his main job Fencer sub here. Maybe more of a draw for manual control, you know, since it gives him access to that move up skill. And that's going to potentially have him up to move 5 and jump 2 without requiring a TMR, which is really, really nice. In addition to that, he does get an attack here, which will reduce the target's accuracy by 25 as well. and that's obviously going to help bolster his evade capability as well. Chunak does get the Nightblade sub-job. On top of that, we've seen this job actually quite a bit on physical units, especially as of late, but I've listed the highlights here. Nice job, especially it comes with a pretty nice passive there as well. So I think this will definitely see some use. Double resist does tie in nicely actually with the base damage resist that he has with that pierce and missile resist. Maiming slash with the AoE healing down effect that it brings can come in really handy at times. And spinning slash is actually his only source of a large modifier in his kit with a nice 210% mod on it. Now last he gets the thief sub-job where he'll get shadow cast and steel vision. So definitely could be interesting for manual play, once again. Maybe if you're going all out for an evade build with him, that could be a consideration. More importantly though, this does give him access to steal time as well, and that definitely has some nice uses on occasion. For myself though, I think in most scenarios, I'd probably be looking at either Nightblade or Fencer. All right, so as we do, let's move into future considerations and kind of talk about what's going to be coming in or around Chunak's release and what else we might want to get our hands on. And let's start with the vision card that will be coming out the week following Chunak's release. Decent enough base stats on the card here, Notably, it does have that 4 agility, which is really nice. And that really erases entirely, any slight concerns that I had when it comes to Chunak's base agility. The bestowed effect on the card is a little underwhelming though at just 15 slash attack. I think it's made up for though with the party effect here, which gives that 35% luck and 35% slash res penetration. So big time party effect VC here. This is a very nice effect not only for Chunak, but the rest of the water cast, which I think generally lacks when it comes to innate slash res penetration. And this is actually the first slash res penetration that we've had for the water element. Now, interestingly, Global does already have a water-based 35% luck to the party with Lara Croft's limited time vision card. So I do wonder if they'll consider making some changes to this card in light of that. If not though, that would make Water the first element to have 2 full value luck vision cards at his disposal. And that would certainly be notable and definitely a boon for the elements, in terms of trying to build evade or accuracy based teams. All right, so moving on to some new equipment that's going to be coming along around the same time as Chunak. And the first one here is a sword that is roughly translated as Wave Sword. And this one is getting an amazing 4 different passives tied into it. There is a catch though, and that's that 3 of them are actually job conditional. Chunak's main job of Fencer though is one of the ones that is able to take advantage of it. Pretty crazy sword here though, it does actually come along with the standard 15 slash attack that we've come to expect on any +5 MR sword. On top of that though, it's adding a 30% acquired AP, 30% counter block, and 15 all element attack. And that last one in particular is very interesting in that it's going to apply to any element, and thus is going to stack with any individual elemental attack up buff that you have elsewhere in your gear, perhaps on a Trust Stone. That acquired AP up and the reaction block in particular are a couple that I personally tend to favor in many Trust Stone loadouts just for the sort of unanimous utility that they can bring. So I do really like that this item has those built into it already, and that's going to free up a couple of Trust Stone slots for me to use on other things. Alright, so along the same line, we also have a new accessory that's going to debut right after Chunak's release. And this one again, sort of roughly translated is the Crow's Cloak. And here once again, we have 4 total passives on this equipment, with the latter 2 actually being job limited in that they're limited to Thief, Ninja, Assassin, and Fencer jobs. So all of the more sort of evasive jobs that we have in the game. And these additional passives, that we're seeing on gear seem to be sort of a new direction of equipment power creep that we're seeing recently. Moving beyond the sort of standard 1 or 2 passives that we've seen, in the first 2.5 years of the game. But thus far, they've been sort of balancing that with these additional effects being job conditional. And it's just something we saw start kind of with Lightning Sword and the Final Fantasy XIII collaboration. So it's definitely sort of an interesting trend that's been going on and something that I'm going to continue to keep an eye on. Pretty nice item here though, it's giving that nice all-around evasion capability between both the raw evade and raw luck stats that are on the piece. And on top of that, it's adding that agility effect as well. The cherry on top here is that 10 area resistance. And that's something previously, on cloth units has been very difficult to get. Now regarding that agility effect, as far as I can tell from Ultima, this is actually going to get dispelled after the wearer takes his first hit in battle. Definitely a nice boon for it though, and it's going to give the wearer, anywhere between 5 to 7 agility, depending on what their base value is at. All right, so let's flash over to our 2022 timeline. And And here on the global side, we do anticipate Sodali being released, imminently, likely in next week's update. So based on that, we can expect Chunak and his vision card to be released here in global in roughly 3.5 to 4 months from the release of this video. Now, in terms of other considerations for water until that point, as of today, there is absolutely nothing else on the horizon. Obviously that story can change very quickly. We do have several events here along the way where there's going to be some unknowns released. And that's going to come in the form of 2 global festivals as well as 2 sets of seasonals, with summer that we're expecting any day now, and then in or around Chunak's release is going to be Halloween. So there's some definite potential there for Gumi to maybe throw in another water unit along the way. We'll sort of have to see. We are expecting the Mastery 2 update for Summer El Sorel as well, which could raise her stocks a bit. On the counter element side, in terms of the lightning elements, obviously both Final Fantasy XIII's lightning and Final Fantasy Tactics with Undergod Cid are going to be coming in hot at that 2.5-year anniversary. I think there's going to be a lot of hype and a lot of people wanting to use both of those units, and they're going to be around. And honestly, that's going to make it that much harder to use Chunak and water, in and around that event. So due to that fact, I'm honestly not expecting a ton of hype or frankly a ton of interest in this unit. And I think that's more or less kind of what has been seen on the Japanese side. There hasn't been as many opportunities to use this unit, and that's probably led to less people wanting to pull for him. In terms of those unknown units though, kind of going back to that topic, a lot of people are speculating that Fire is going to get some love. And I think the probability of that happening is pretty high, especially with some big ice units being released on the Japanese side recently. Actually, just this week, Alayla, a new ice missile unit, was announced. I don't have her up on my timeline here yet, but she is coming as well. She's going to be a 100 cost ice unit. So honestly, I do envision a bump for Fire coming. I would pretty much bet the house on that one. And if that happens, that could certainly change the situation for water in a big way. And I think that could help raise Chunak's stock and water, quite a bit if that were to happen. Remember too that we do have that Dark Odin vision card, and that's going to enable Chunak maybe to slide into a ice party as well. So another potential option there. Time will certainly tell, with these unknowns that we talked about, but if you're interested in pulling for this unit, definitely keep those seasonal and festival events in mind and plan accordingly with your Vizier. All right, so here is a mock build that I've put together for Chunak, and starting first with his equipment, and I've gone with that wave sword on him that we talked about earlier. You could also consider the Brotherhood +1 here, and that's pretty good too. I just think that the 4 passives that this one gets and the flexibility that's going to give you with your trust stones is just pretty hard to top. I do have that new Crow's Cloak as well here in his main armor slot, and I think this is a really nice option for him, even if you're not going for an evade build, because it's giving him that area resist here. For a TMR, I went with Locke's TMR for the nice evade stats that it has on it, as well as the nice effect that it has if you opt to use it. I think stacking that luck and agility effect along with his personal evade buff can be pretty strong in the right setting. For an Esper, I've gone with Dark Odin for the mix of evade and damage that it brings. If you don't have him, you could always use normal Odin instead. You could also look at something like Glacial, though it is a little bit of a drop off in terms of the total evade and damage, compared to Dark Odin. All right, so moving into the vision card setup, and my main defenses here are built up using these 3 cards, which are going to be bringing the HP up to the party, area resist, and single target resistance to the party. And in the current state of War of the Visions, these are really my trifecta, that I look for in any elemental party for the universal defensive value that they have. And currently there is no way to penetrate either single target or area resistance in the game. Now adding to that, I've used both water elemental luck cards, which will give him a nice boost when it comes to both his accuracy and evade. If you did miss out on Lara Croft's vision card, you could opt to use Secrets of the Heart here instead, or you could drop down in your luck value and go for something more offensive, perhaps something like Thanks for the Votes or the Astrologer card. Offensively, I do have the /res penetration here from Chunak's card, as well as the attack up and dex up bonuses from the other party VCs. Now in terms of the vision card loadout here, water in general just has so many good cards at its disposal. There are really a lot of nice builds that you can come up with. This setup that I'm using here though, I believe is kind of giving a mix of things to build upon some of those base strengths that we looked at for Chunak, specifically being his attack, his luck and dex, and his area resistance. And when I say area resistance, it is pretty notable for him. In this build, we're going to have 40 area resistance out of the box, so he can actually get up to a pretty considerable 55 area resistance after he uses his self buff. And for that reason, as I think with all of evade units, it's best to run him alongside a stout tank for PvP. In that setup, he'll be able to shake off a couple of area damage hits if they manage to land on him, and maybe he'll even dodge a couple along the way. And that's more or less what I'm going for here in this build. His survivability, in my view, will be that layered combination of the area resist along with a pretty decent amount of evade that I've built up here. And personally, I do think that will be the key to using him, because he doesn't have access to reflex or immortal spirit or re-raise to fall back on and bail him out if he were to take fatal damage. Alright, so for my Trust Stone loadout here, I do have a couple of focuses for this set as well. Now first, the defensive portion on the left side is a luck set, and this is obviously to help out his evade and accuracy capabilities. And this time I'm looking at maybe hitting an ice team with Chunak and my water team. An ice team maybe featuring snow and a ranged missile unit behind him. So I'm using this combination of ice and missile resistance in my slot 1, and I have that paired with my other 4 passives here, which are sort of my standard universal defensive setup. For the offensive stones on the right side, I'm using an agility set. Again, this is going to just help out his evade and thus his survivability. I do have a dex passive here to improve his crit and the damage of his attacks, and I've paired that with crit damage up to enhance his modifiers on top of that. That wave sword that we talked about does already cover the reaction block and acquired AP passives for me. So here I'm able to focus on water attack, slash res penetration, attack up, and defense penetration, which should overall be a pretty potent combination and having him do very nice damage. So with all that tallied up, you can see here pretty decent overall stats for Chunak, especially when we're looking at his agility, dex, and luck values. Pretty healthy attack total for him as well. In this build, he's going to be at roughly 271 total evade, and that would be prior to using any self buffs. If you wanted to get that even higher, you could definitely get that by maybe sacrificing one of the vision cards in the build, maybe swapping it out for something like Shiva. I think it would all depend on the other units that you have him paired with, whether or not you wanted to go all in on evade. In this particular build though, I was envisioning pairing Chunak with both Celis and Astrius, so the evade here is more of an augment for his survivability rather than the only source of it. Same goes for his accuracy. I've not used his Nightblade passive here in this build, so he's sitting at 322% accuracy. I've also not really focused on accuracy vision cards in the build as well. So same story here. If you're facing an evade meta, swaps can easily be made here. Water does have several nice accuracy cards, and Chunak can very easily get to that 400 accuracy plateau or beyond, and he'll be able to deal with high evade units without a problem. So what's my verdict on Chunak? For pros, this guy has a lot going for him when it comes to his attack, his dex, and his luck stats. He's ranking very highly amongst the pack in all of those categories, and that's all going to spell pretty nice damage coming from this guy. He has a stacked kit as well when it comes to chaining capability, instantly becoming one of the best chainers in the game, and he's bringing along with that coveted 38% single target resistance debuff. He also has that Mega Break skill, which is deleting Protect and Barrier and breaking the target's defense by 30. So this guy is definitely going to pack a pretty decent punch. Even more so, I think he's going to help set up your team, not only by debuffing the targets, but also being a chain starter. Those same capabilities are definitely going to rev up the water element's guild raid capabilities, and we'll put them amongst the top elements overall in the game when it comes to potential score outputs. On the more negative side, Chunak is definitely lacking somewhat when it comes to range and the range height of his attacks. He's topping out at just a range 4. Most of his attacks also just have a range height of 1. In general, he's also a pretty squishy unit if he's focused directly, and he's especially vulnerable when it comes to magic and slash damage. He does have a couple of tools to help him out, in terms of his survivability that we've talked about, but sadly, none of them are nearly as powerful as reflex, re-raise, or immortal spirit, and those combinations that we've seen on other top tier evade units. And with the general high accuracy trend on all the latest units that we've seen coming out in the game, it's definitely going to make things a little bit difficult for Chunak, and you'll definitely need to pick your opponents wisely when you use him. My final word here is that Chunak is definitely going to be a strong sort of secondary, maybe a wingman to your damage carry of your PvP team. I think that he'll work great next to somebody like Astrius. And while I think his damage will be pretty good, I think he's just lacking just a little bit in his mods and his survivability to be a true damage carry for your team all on his own. From a PvE perspective though, I think this is one of the better ones builds that we've seen to date in the game. He has that great assortment of different chaining capabilities and nice debuffs that he can bring that are going to allow you to put up huge chains on the target and do a ton of damage. Alright guys, so that is Chunak. You know, pretty good unit, definitely not a PvP meta breaker, but I think that he definitely can hold his own, you know, in the right conditions. And along with Glaciella, you know, is certainly one of the better PvE units we've seen come around in quite a while. I'm glad that this guy is going to be part of the permanent pool. I would like to have him, but there's just so much going on at the 2.5-year anniversary, and also with all those seasonal units coming in or around his release, that I'm just going to kind of have to see where my Viz is standing, you know, by the time this guy is released. And because of that, maybe I'll just end up taking a flyer on this guy, maybe a couple pulls, and maybe just take more of a wait until he comes approach. I want to know though, how are you guys feeling about this unit? Are you a water main and are setting aside your Vizier already to pull him on day one? Or are you on Team Lightning and looking forward to shutting this guy down completely? Definitely let me know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed the video today and you like what I'm doing here on the channel, consider giving it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel as well. Help my channel grow here and help me hit my goal of hitting 1,000 subscribers. And that's really all I have to say for today. So as always, stay safe out there, and I'll see you guys in the next one.